This presentation will survey the credibility and political motivations of Ava DuVernay's documentary film 13th. Throughout history, conservative Republican leaders have used rhetoric and fallacies, such as horror framing, to manipulate voters and to criminalize minorities in order to gain and assert power. Ava DuVernay, an African-American female director and screenwriter of the Netflix documentary film 13th, highlights these fallacies and brings attention to the modern-day problem of mass incarceration of African Americans. The documentary clarifies the misinformation which has been controlled by the powerful. The film, composed of a combination of interviews and historical archive clips, is named for the loophole in the 13th Amendment, which allows freedom to all people except criminals. Corporations, politicians, and the media, DuVernay argues, use this loophole to target and label African Americans as criminals and thereby have created a new system of slavery without it being recognized as such for political and economic gain. This essay seeks to survey the credibility of DuVernay's argument by addressing criticism of her film, specifically criticism towards the credibility of interviewees and the possibility of political motivations, and seeks to modernize her argument with recent events, namely Donald Trump's presidency. Ava DuVernay's documentary, 13th, effectively explains methods of power manipulation to give viewers the ability to critically survey rhetoric used by modern-day political leaders, such as Donald Trump, through use of accurate and credible information, and therefore deserves the many awards, including 4 Emmy Awards, and the high praise it has received. Thirteenth received criticism for the choice in interviewees, including Anthony Capel Van Jones, as well as criticism for highlighting historical Black leaders like Assata Shakur. In his article, 13th is an insult to MLK, Kyle Smith of New York Post identified Van Jones as an ex-communist and 9/11 truther. Smith also criticized DuVernay for referring to Assata Shakur as a hero. Shakur is a Black Panther Party member who was stopped by a state trooper, shot him, and was placed into jail. She later escaped jail and fled to Cuba. Currently, she is on FBI's most wanted terrorist list. 13th does not glorify violence in historical revolutions. Instead, the documentary shares information about the revolutions, highlighting the sacrifice that comes with change in order to inform the audience of the history of Black oppression. Smith is trivializing that sacrifice and discouraging change under the threat of becoming entrapped in the very system DuVernay seeks to destroy. Another critic, Armin White, an African-American National Review journalist, claims that 13th interviewees have been bolstered by the privileges of academia and the media, claiming that they are an embarrassment to W.E.B. Du Bois' hope of an educated Black class. White continues to explain that the interviewees, in general, are manipulating the oppression of a lower class to broadcast their individual resentments as if grinding the axes of the masses. One of the chosen interviewees for the 13th film was Angela Davis. Angela Davis is a Black Panther Party member. In the 60s, she was accused of murder and kidnapping and was criminalized as armed and dangerous by the FBI and the media. She was held on trial and eventually was found innocent. White downplays the accomplishments of a largely minority group under the mere association of position, failing to recognize the oppression many in the group overcame. Angela Davis, for example, was highlighted in the 13th film for her accomplishments during the Civil Rights era, despite the violence she experienced growing up. Though White is African American himself, he is unfortunately contributing to the system of Black oppression. DuVernay has received criticism for having political motivations, especially due to the timing of her release of the film during the presidential election campaign of 2016 between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. If the film does have political motivation, it is to inform the viewer of the manipulative rhetoric used during campaigning. In the film, both Clinton and Trump are equally criticized for their role in mass incarceration. This question is directed to the viewer, encouraging critical thinking to overcome political manipulation. This critical thinking is of utmost importance, especially during a brutal election such as the one in 2016. Due to the amount of content and the overall thesis, 13th did not go into depth of the rhetoric specifically used by Donald Trump. Since the film was released just before the presidential campaign ended in 2016, it could not analyze Trump's time as President of the United States. We can refer to outside sources to modernize 13th's message and give more rhetorical analysis on current politics. Fielding Montgomery, a communications PhD student in rhetoric and political culture at the University of Maryland, reviews the method of horror framing in the article, The Monstrous Election, Horror Framing in Televised Campaign Advertisements During the 2016 Presidential Election. Horror framing is a genre used in political ads that reflects the horror genre. These ads, Montgomery states, create hysteria to maintain their political economic influence over the area, and thereby allow Trump to create distinct, otherized monsters and provide methods for slaying such ghouls, thus repeatedly attempting to instill audience efficacy through epidictic self-praise. The former president purposefully invokes fear in voters, stigmatizes minorities as criminals, and idealizes times of racial violence with nostalgia, all in order to gain political power. It was this focus on entrepreneurship that justified systems like slavery and indentured servitude and continues to justify the incrimination of African American communities. Trump, referring to the late 40s and 50s as a time when he said, "We were not pushed around, we were respected by everybody, we had just won a war, we were pretty much doing what we had to do." During that time, millions of African Americans were fighting to end segregation, and many were victims of police and racial violence. The speech indicates racial motivations in Trump's core belief system. Respect is earned through force, Trump believes, and violence can be justified with a power gain. Courtney Lauren Anderson is a Georgia State University law professor and describes use of political rhetoric during drug epidemics in the peer-reviewed essay, Opioids Are the New Black. Trump referred to many non-white countries, such as Haiti, El Salvador, and African nations as shithole countries, while positively affirming immigration from predominantly white countries, such as Norway and Asian countries, due to their economic benefits. Anderson analyzes several of Trump's political ads, highlighting this divisive rhetoric. Trump makes efforts to prime Caucasian Americans, meaning to expose socially relevant stimuli to facilitate the emergence of impressions, attitudes, and beliefs. His efforts are to carry over those beliefs rooted in white power to the American public. Those beliefs are manipulated and focused into disguises, claiming to solve some other problem, as highlighted in the 13th film. It is important for the American audience to understand this political manipulation and the true motivations behind it. 13th allows viewers to understand the historical context and evidence of power manipulation. Ava DuVernay has gathered a credible collection of American leaders and has given them a platform to speak out against the criminal justice system. The film release was timed so that this information could reach voters and allow them to make an informed decision, to fully understand the rhetoric used by political leaders, and to question elected authority. There is evidence from many sources that Donald Trump has used this rhetoric, not only during campaigning, but during his time in office as well. This rhetoric was used to manipulate the American population, to assert political power, and to gain financial force. DuVernay's film is a masterpiece and has earned a seat at the political table. Here are a few discussion questions you can think about. How can you more critically analyze political rhetoric to understand underlying motivations? What role does civil rights history play in the modern-day Black Lives Matter movement? When have you seen examples of manipulative rhetoric used by social media, news sources, corporations, or political leaders?